that internal resistance all comes from the ego. The ego does not want you to realize yourself, because the realization of yourself means the end of the ego, which is why when you meditate and do all of those healthy things that I was talking about, the ego puts up such a big fight because it doesn't want you to do them. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Ben and I create videos every single week talking about different topics related to meditation, spiritual development, God, the divine, spiritual experiences. If that's something you're interested in, if you're looking at developing yourself in those ways, then please do hit the subscribe button and follow along for more videos like this. In today's video, I wanted to talk about blind faith. This is something that I hear a lot about in a negative way. A lot of people will talk about blind faith as if it's like a daft thing, as if you have to be absolutely ridiculous to have blind faith in something. And my argument to this is that everything in life requires an element of blind faith. Every relationship you enter, every friendship you enter, every job that you start, it all requires blind faith. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't even know if tomorrow is going to exist. We go to bed at night with a blind faith that tomorrow is going to come about, but we don't actually know if that's the case. And spirituality and working towards realizing yourself or realizing God, whichever way you prefer to look at it, requires an element of blind faith. Everyone that turns to divinity or has some kind of spiritual journey will have periods where they have doubts, where they wonder whether what they're doing is correct or whether they actually are on the right path. And I would say that, sometimes it is worth checking, because there are lots of peripheral paths along the main route back to God, which can draw us away, which can occupy a lot of our time and not really progress us in any way. So I would say that you do have to check yourself. It's not that you just blindly walk into everything and say, oh, well, everything is a case of blind faith, so there's no point in putting any logic to this. I just got to go in with it. Obviously, you've got to go in with some level of logic. I would say that my personal relationship with the divine or with God has developed in the same way that any normal relationship would develop. As I've gotten older, as I've delved more into this work, as I've meditated more and got closer to God, my inner relationship with that source has developed massively. And people would say, well, it's just blind faith, but it's not blind faith, because it's something that I feel internally. In the same way that any other relationship looks blind on the surface, it looks like there's nothing to it, there's no substance there, but obviously, as we all know, any friendship, any relationship has an internal aspect to it. You develop an internal connection with that person, be it a friend or a partner. And so it works in the same way with God. You develop an internal relationship with God, and you might picture, to you, God might look like Jesus, or God might look like Krishna, or it might look like the universe. It might just be that you have no particular image that you associate as being God. You just internally know that there is a creator or a higher power. And so it doesn't really matter what your vision of God is, or what your image rather of God is, or how you perceive God necessarily, but the fact that you have a relationship with something that you know to be the essence of the entire universe, the source of everything, which I personally call God. Developing a relationship with that energy, that entity, is hugely powerful, and it's in my opinion the purpose of our existence is to work our way back to God. Not that we've ever left, but there is a part of us that has forgotten. We've been so wrapped up in our egoic self, we've forgotten our nature as being divine. So this whole spiritual journey is one of working our way back to God. It's important to remember that there's always going to be an element of blind faith. And realistically, until you realize God, until you actually merge back with God, which is what you might hear as enlightenment or moksha or self-realization in Hinduism, is when you realize the Atma, when you realize God, when you merge back with the source, when there's no longer any duality, no longer any sense of you and God being separate. You have merged back, and not just on an intellectual level, but on an actual experiential level. You experience yourself as God. That is ultimately the main goal, if you want to call it a goal, of the spiritual work, of any faith, any religion, is to work your way back to God and actually realize yourself as being God. Before that happens, before that merging or that self-realization takes place, there's always going to be blind faith. There's always going to be stepping into something and not actually having certainty yet. And that is basically blind faith. You're going in with a belief that this is going to be the outcome, but you can't be certain because you've not had that outcome yet. Like anything in life, like the fact that tomorrow hasn't appeared yet. I have blind faith that tomorrow is going to be about. That's why I put money away. That's why I save. That's why I exercise, so that my body's going to be strong and healthy as I grow older. But that's blind faith. When we talk about blind faith and we direct it to spiritual faith or to belief in God, all of a sudden it's a crazy thing to do. But this is where I find it absolutely ridiculous that people say, why have you got blind faith? Why would you blindly believe something that you can't see? And it's like, well, you do that all the time. You blindly believe that your relationship is going to be successful with your partner. You blindly believe that your job that you've just gotten is going to be a successful job. You blindly believe that tomorrow is going to come. You blindly believe that you're going to be healthy tomorrow. There's loads of things that we just go along with blindly. And developing a spiritual direction and internally working, progressing spiritually, getting closer to the divine or God, that is going to require blind faith. The other important thing to mention here is that we all have an ego. We all have this sense of I, this sense of individuality, a sense of identity. And that identity is the ego. The ego makes up our identity as being separate from everyone and everything. But actually that doesn't really exist. It's just an egoic identity. It doesn't have any permanent reality. And so that egoic identity wants to remain separate from everything. It wants to be in control of you, really. And the process of spirituality is shedding the skin of the ego and eventually realizing yourself as not being an individual self, not being separate from anyone or anything. This is where oneness comes about. You realize yourself as everything. God realization, they may call it. Now, that process is a hard one to go through because the ego will put up a fight. The ego will resist you doing things that are beneficial or taking you closer to realization. So anything that is beneficial to you, exercise, eating healthily, meditating, believing in God, you will face internal resistance. That internal resistance will come up in the form of thoughts. They may stem from your societal programming, your parental programming, what your friends believe, all of that kind of stuff comes to the forefront of your mind and creates doubt, creates distractions, tries to take you off of the track, off of the path rather. That internal resistance all comes from the ego. The ego does not want you to realize yourself, because the realization of yourself means the end of the ego, which is why when you meditate and do all of those healthy things that I was talking about, the ego puts up such a big fight because it doesn't want you to do them. That's why you have resistance to do positive things, but you have absolutely no resistance to do things that are easy and pleasure seeking and short term in their outcome, in what you gain from them is very short term. You know, masturbation, eating unhealthy foods, all of those kinds of things that don't progress you in any way. They are short-term pleasures that the ego will lure you with. The ego will put forward in your mind and get you to take part in those actions or those habits in order to take you off of the path of self-realization, of working towards God. So I know I'm digressing a bit here, but I hope this video makes sense. I did want to make it quite short and just get to the point really and explain that blind faith is totally normal, totally natural. We all have to go through blind faith in order to get certainty. Your blind faith will incrementally not be so blind anymore because it becomes more internal. It becomes an internal knowing, and that internal knowing develops and it has stages and levels that you have to kind of progress to, that you embody more and more, and it becomes more of a certainty. Until eventually, hopefully, when we all reach God realization, it becomes an experience and there is no longer blind faith. But it's a process. So I wanted to make a video. If any of you were wondering whether you were silly following this path when it is blind, or how you're supposed to know whether you are on the right path, it's internal. and you will all have your own internal compass which will direct you. You have to tune into that, tune into the knowing part of yourself, the part of you that is intuiting the right way. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to be putting out videos every single week talking about different topics along these lines to help you and also myself progress along this path. So if you have any questions, please do fire away in the comments. I'll try and get back to all of the questions and comments that you guys put on this video. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next video.